Our story begins in 1895 in the little community of Inez, Kentucky. This isolated mountain hamlet laid at the heart of the Tug River country, far eastern edge of the state, where the mountains fold up tight against the West Virginia line, and the good bottomland runs in narrow strips along the water. It was here that a young boy named Nimrod was born. The lad was named after his Scottish grandfather, who was among the first white settlers to tame these mountain wilds. Young Nimrod grew up in your typical hard-working mountain family, scratching a living from the land that didn't easily give up anything. They raised corn on hillsides that were so steep that locals often joked that a man could fall right out of his own field. Hogs ran free and roamed the forest, fattening up on chestnuts and acorns. And every year, the family put out a garden that had to carry them from one summer clean through to the next. Yeah, it was a life of endless work, and there was precious little cash money that ever passed through it. Well, anyhow, when it came to schooling, well, it was treated as little more than an afterthought. There was always too much work waiting to be done around the farm for anybody to place much importance on books or classroom lessons. Corn had to be planted, hoed, and harvested. Firewood had to be cut and stacked before winter. Livestock needed feeding, and countless other chores demanded the hands of every able-bodied member of the family. And on a hard-scramble mountain farm, even a young boy was expected to earn his keep. Because of this, Nimrod made it only as far as second grade before his pa pulled him out of school for good. The old man told him to quit wasting his time on such foolishness and put his hands to work doing something useful. After all, book learning had little value on the farm. A man couldn't plow a field with a multiplication table. And most importantly, his pa was fond of saying a hungry family couldn't eat paper pages the way they could corn that had been raised on a hillside. After the day's chores had been tended and the last streaks of daylight had slipped behind the mountains, there they would settle into cane-bottomed chairs and listen to the whippoorwills calling from the distant timber. Those quiet evenings offered a welcome reprieve from the back-breaking labor of scratching out a living from the stubborn mountain soil. From an early age, Nimrod possessed a natural knack for carving things by hand. Using his papa's pocket knife, the boy could whittle intricate totem poles and remarkably lifelike figurines from branches that had fallen from the hickory and oak trees that surrounded the family homestead. And what began as a boyhood pastime would soon become something of an obsession. In time, Nimrod became so proficient at the craft that he set his sights on building himself a guitar. Now, it was a crude instrument by all measures, one that was fashioned entirely from whatever materials the boy could find. He carved the neck by hand and constructed the body with a thin spruce top, while the sides and back were made from yellow birch. For strings, the resourceful youngster stripped the wire from his mama's screen door, which was a deed that earned him one of the worst whippings of his entire childhood. But alas, he had, in fact, built himself a guitar. Now, it might not have produced the sweetest sound, and it surely wouldn't have impressed a trained musician, but to Nimrod, no, it was worth more than any store-bought instrument. And that handmade guitar became the prized possession of his formative years. He carried it with him nearly everywhere he went, and spent the better part of his childhood writing poetry, and then laboring over the words until he could set them to music. Truth be told, music ran deep in his family. Oh, his mama possessed the voice of an angel, clear and sweet enough to drift across the holler on a still summer evening. And his sister, well, she could pick both a guitar and a banjo. And when their chores were finished, the three of them would gather on the porch and fill the darkness with song. Much of what they sang had been passed down through the family for generations. Old Scottish and British ballads that had been carried across the Atlantic by their ancestors and preserved in the mountains through memory and repetition. They were songs of homes left behind, lovers who had been separated by war, wandering soldiers, cruel kings, and restless spirits roaming through the moors. And though Nimrod had never seen England or Scotland, the old melodies stirred something deep within him. They belonged as much to the Appalachian hills as they did to the distant lands from which they had come. By the turn of the century, the winds of change began to blow in eastern Kentucky. Across the water in West Virginia, the railroads had come winding through the mountains, and right behind them came the coal companies. Steel rails were laid along the creek beds and blasted through the mountainsides, opening up a country that had remained isolated from the outside world for generations. Places that had once required a day's journey by horseback could suddenly be reached aboard a train, and the sound of a locomotive whistle began echoing through the hollers, where little had ever disturbed the silence beyond a barking dog or a church bell on a Sunday morning. Nearly overnight, great wooden tipples rose above the valleys. Mine openings were cut into the mountains, and company houses went up in long, orderly rows. Entire coal camps appeared in hollers that had once only held 3 families, and along with those miners came railroad men, timber cutters, merchants, doctors, and preachers, and all sorts of people hoping to make their living from the riches being pulled out of the earth. And to those mountain families watching from across the Tug River, it must have seemed as if a whole new world had sprung up before their eyes. Because for generations, the people of Martin County, well, they had survived on raising what they ate and making nearly everything they owned. And money, well, most folks had never seen it, since most business was conducted through barter, trading labor and goods according to whatever they needed. But those coal fields, well, they offered something almost unheard of in the mountains, a steady paycheck. And before long, men from Martin County began crossing that river in search of the first regular paying jobs their family had ever known. Some went alone at first, carrying little more than a change of clothes and a dinner bucket. Others brought their wives and their children with them and abandoned their farms that had belonged to their people for generations. And in time, entire families made the crossing, following brothers and cousins and neighbors who had already found work in the mines. The promise was simple enough. A man who was willing to enter a mountain before daylight and remain there until the evening whistle could earn real money. He could buy flour instead of grinding cornmeal, and even purchase store-bought shoes for his young'uns, and maybe even bring home a few luxuries that had once seemed to be beyond imagination. And for folks who were accustomed to measuring wealth in smokehouse meat, the prospect of receiving wages every 2 weeks, well, it was difficult to resist. But you see, those coal barons weren't offering charity. The work, well, it was dark and dangerous and unforgiving. Cave-ins, explosions, runaway mine cars, and pockets of poisonous gas could take a man's life without warning. Coal dust would settle into his lungs and follow him home. And those wages, well, they were little more than company scrip rather than actual money. That's right. They forced miners to buy their necessities from the company store at prices that were set by the same people who signed their pay slips. The allure of money was irresistible. Well, anyhow, by 1910, Nimrod was 14 years young. But in his father's eyes, that boy was plenty mature enough to do a grown man's work. And if he was old enough to work, he was old enough to put food on his own table. And so, Nimrod packed what few belongings he owned, kissed his mama goodbye, and then crossed the Tug River into the unknowns of West Virginia, where he promptly took a job working in the coal mines as a hand loader. Now, you might ask, what's the hand loader? Well, it had to be a small person who could crawl into tight places and work a seam that might be as narrow as 12 inches from the roof to the floor. And there, Nimrod spent his entire shift lying on his side in total darkness, with his face only inches from the coal. Then he used a short-handled pick and undercut the seam by swinging sideways, striking the same black wall again and again until his arms trembled from exhaustion. He then drilled deep holes into the face and packed it with dynamite. Then he would light the fuse and scramble out as fast as he could. That explosion would roll through the mountain like distant thunder and shake loose a cloud of coal dust and broken stone. And after that smoke cleared, Nimrod would crawl back in and begin loading what the blast had brought down. Every lump of coal had to be shoveled into a mine car by hand, shovel load by shovel load and ton after ton. And once that car was loaded, another took its place. The work was never ending. His fingers blistered, and the muscles in his back felt like they'd been pulled loose from the bone. And for his work, Nimrod would be paid as much as 50 cents for a 10-hour shift. The company had him right where they wanted him. They owned the house where he slept. They charged him rent, charged him for his tools and his blasting powder. And each time his wages fell short, he fell deeper in debt. It was a vicious cycle, one that many men would spend their entire lives trying to escape. And so it would be with Nimrod.
Give someone you love the gift of old-fashioned storytelling. 5 books for the young and old alike that will make your heart smile. Click the link below to order your copy of The Appalachian Storyteller today. Also available on Amazon.
Yet, the one thing that carried him through all those terrible years beneath the mountain was his love for music. That's right. While other men cursed the darkness or saved their breath for the work ahead, Nimrod would sing. He spent countless hours singing songs he had written while swinging a pickaxe against that coal. Every blow fell into a rhythm, and the ring of steel against stone became a kind of percussion, keeping time as his voice drifted through the narrow passageways. Using those same melodies that had been passed down from his Scottish ancestors, he sang the old ballads to himself, 1,000 feet inside of that mountain. Songs that once had been sung beside hearth fires in the borderlands of Scotland now echoed through the coal seams of West Virginia. By 1920, he had been working for 10 years in the bowels of the earth in Mingo County, West Virginia, which was known as one of the most dangerous places in the United States. Newspapers called it Bloody Mingo, and for good reason. You see, it was here that United Mine Workers were beginning to organize the southern coal fields. And the coal barons, well, they meant to stop them by any means. In fact, any miner who signed a union card was immediately fired by sundown and thrown out of his company house, with his furniture set in the road and his family standing beside it. And soon, the coal mine where Nimrod worked became ground zero to an all-out battle. Hired detectives had come in to throw union miners' families out of their houses. Meanwhile, the town's police chief stood against them, all while Nimrod and hundreds of coal miners kept demanding more workers' rights. But those wealthy owners, well, they weren't going to bow down to no hillbillies. And what came next was the bloody Battle of Blair Mountain, where thousands of miners entered a standoff against those coal companies' hired guns. And with their deep pockets, the tycoons even managed to convince the government to send in the United States Army to fight on their side. The two sides squared off in the biggest armed American uprising since the Civil War. That event forever changed Nimrod for the remainder of his life, and he became a staunch advocate for better pay and working conditions for miners. He wrote political protest songs that no one in the outside world knew existed, except for those fellow coal miners who listened to the songs in the evenings after their shifts. All totaled, Nimrod worked for 42 years in those mines, until he was 57 years old, when his back, finally worn down from a lifetime of loading coal on his knees, gave way. And even on his last day, when he went down into the dark, which he had done since he was 14 years old, he couldn't get himself back out. They simply had to carry him back out. And that was the end of it. Now, here's the part that ought to make your blood boil. His body was broken and his lungs were failing him with black lung disease. But the coal companies and their paid doctors, well, they claimed that black lung disease didn't exist. Instead, they called it miner's asthma. Oh, and it was harmless, they said. So after 42 years underground, Nimrod was sent home with blackened lungs, a broken body, and not a penny to show for it. Years went by, and in 1974, Nimrod was an 80-year-old man who still had an authentic voice that carried a vast song collection over his lifetime of struggles living in those mountains. It was then that something amazing happened, when someone recorded his voice and put those songs on a record so that his story would become known across America. He was so genuine and literally a living window into the past, and his voice captivated the music world. And soon, an entire album of his songs were published that gained critical praise, and for the first time in his life, Nimrod was earning a good living. And by 1980, he even appeared alongside Loretta Lynn in the Coal Miner's Daughter movie. In 1982, he was the featured singer at the World's Fair in Knoxville, Tennessee. And a few years later, the National Endowment for the Arts named Nimrod Workman a National Heritage Fellow, the highest honor the United States gives a traditional artist. And his music catalog, well, it was entered into the Library of Congress. Nimrod died in 1994, just weeks after his 99th birthday, and then he was buried in Knox County, Tennessee. During his entire life, he never left the mountains that he loved so much, and somehow, the poor boy from eastern Kentucky who was sold into the coal mines at the age of 14 had emerged victorious as one of the greatest men in American history. So there you go, my friends. Now you know the rest of the story of one of America's greatest icons, Nimrod Workman. Thanks so much for watching this episode. And as always, be sure to like and subscribe for more true stories from Appalachia's past.